Bear down, fam. Max Crosby, $106 million. That's the pass rusher who's got Ryan Poles glued to his phone, and in a minute, I'll tell you why the Bears are serious about him and why that trade window doesn't open till November. Meanwhile, ESPN just dropped a quiet bombshell. Tyson Bagent, our own backup, is already being eyed by Tampa Bay to replace a $100 million quarterback in 2027, and I'll break down why Poles isn't giving him away for free. And to close it out, Luther Burden's done for camp, but there's a new name, Caden Davis, torching every practice and already passing a veteran in the roster fight. Bear down, fam? Okay, let us take this piece by piece, because this story has layers, and I want you to understand every single one before we get to the juicy part. First, the context that almost nobody is explaining correctly. This week it was confirmed by two serious sources, Jordan Schultz and Mike Garafolo, that the Chicago Bears were among the teams most interested in landing Vita Vea, the defensive tackle for the Buccaneers. That did not come out of nowhere. It came out because Vea signed an extension with Tampa Bay, and that announcement blew the lid off who had been calling behind the scenes. And there are the Bears again, knocking on doors in the market for elite defensive linemen. Harrison Graham from Bears Now said it plainly on Friday. This is a signal that Ryan Poles is chasing opportunities. And look, you do not need to be a scouting genius to understand why. Chicago's defense in 2025 was, to be generous, mediocre when it came to rushing the passer. Pro Football Focus put actual numbers on it a few months back. The Bears' defensive line sits near the bottom of the league in total pressures and pressure rate, and they finished 25th out of 32 teams in sacks for the season. For a team that wants to fight for a Super Bowl with Caleb Williams entering year 3, that is a problem you cannot patch over. And fam, I have to drop a personal opinion here that goes back further than this season. I have been following this team since the Khalil Mack era, when Chicago actually had that terrifying pass rusher who could flip a game by himself. Ever since Mack left, this franchise has been begging for quarterback pressure like someone digging through couch cushions for loose change. I'm not saying that out of cheap nostalgia. I am saying it because the pattern keeps repeating. A big name arrives, promises to fix the problem, and 2 years later we are back here talking trade rumors because the problem never fully got solved. And here comes the name we all know, and one that hurts a little to say at this point, Montez Sweat. The guy signed a 4-year, $98 million contract after that explosive first stretch in 2023, when it looked like Chicago had found its franchise edge rusher. But honestly, the truth is, Sweat has not been that player with any real consistency since. He had a flat 2024, just 5.5 sacks, and several analysts already list him among the worst contracts on the roster. He has good weeks, he grades out decently in stretches, but the week-to-week impact, the kind of constant pressure that shortens a rival quarterback's internal clock, has not been there the way the contract demands. I'm not saying this to pile on. I am saying it because it is the exact context that explains why Poles is on the phone hunting for another big name in the defensive line. Now, why did Vita Vea not get done? Simple. Tampa Bay decided to extend him. A player of that caliber, a tackle who collapses the middle of the line and makes everything around him easier, does not hit the market if the team that owns him can pay him. And the Bucs could. So Chicago walked away hungry again in an attempt to reinforce the front four. But here is where the story actually gets interesting, because Graham did not stop there. He brought back a name that has been circulating on every single Bears podcast for months, Max Crosby. Let us talk about Crosby with the respect he deserves, because this is not just any edge rusher. Crosby signed a 3-year extension worth $106.5 million with the Raiders, with $91.5 million guaranteed, a deal that, at the time, made him the highest paid non-quarterback in the entire history of the NFL. That deal ties him to Las Vegas through the 2029 season. We are talking about a guy with 4 Pro Bowl selections, close to 60 career sacks, one of the most productive and most consistent pass rushers in the entire league over the last several years. So why does his name keep popping up in trade rumors after signing a contract like that? Because the Raiders, being honest, are still an organizational mess. They have made the playoffs exactly once in the entire Crosby era, and this summer, according to what Graham reported, things are not improving. By his read, the Raiders are getting outworked in joint practices, and they could not even stop the Cardinals in their preseason opener. That is not a cheap joke. That is a serious read that Las Vegas, under Pete Carroll and John Spytek, still has not found its footing. And that is where the real window of opportunity for the Bears opens up. The early November trade deadline, not before. Graham was crystal clear on this. He ruled out any movement before week 1, unless Chicago decides to massively overpay. That means if Chicago wants Crosby, they have to wait and see how the Raiders start their season. If Las Vegas starts poorly, if Crosby is healthy following the knee surgery that torpedoed his trade to the Baltimore Ravens back in March, and if his name heats back up as a movable piece on a losing season, that is when Chicago can knock on that door for real. Listen, that knee injury is a detail we cannot ignore. The Baltimore trade fell apart in March specifically over medical concerns. So before we dream about Crosby at Soldier Field, we need to see him healthy, playing real snaps, proving that knee is not a ghost that follows him through the rest of his contract. I could be wrong, but I would rather see that confirmed on the field before I get too excited. Now the tactical piece, because this is where I want you to understand why this is not as simple as just go get Crosby already. Chicago has a double need on the defensive line. Gervin Dexter is entering a contract year with no extension signed, which always creates uncertainty about whether he sticks around beyond this season. And Grady Jarrett, who arrived with high expectations, had a first year in Chicago that fell short of the hype in 2025. If Jarrett repeats that low level this year, the Bears can get off his deal next offseason and free up meaningful cap space. That opens up an uncomfortable question. Is the main problem with this defense the lack of an elite edge rusher, or is it the lack of a dominant interior tackle who collapses the pocket from the inside? And that question matters, because, according to reports, a strong class of defensive tackles is coming in the 2027 draft. If Chicago decides to wait and target that kind of player next spring, to pair him with Jordan Vandenberg, the 6th-round rookie who is shaping up as a positive surprise this preseason, then spending a first-round pick or more on Crosby in November complicates that plan. You cannot maximize two asset management strategies at the same time without sacrificing one of them. My honest opinion, and this already burned me once with other trade predictions that never got done, so I am saying this carefully. I think this trade can happen, but only under a very specific scenario. We need the Raiders to start poorly, we need Crosby fully healthy, and we need the price to not be a full first-round pick, but something manageable, maybe a second-rounder plus an add-on. If Las Vegas opens the year at 0-3 or 0-4, with Crosby producing but the whole team sinking, that is when Spidek has to run cold numbers on whether it is worth continuing to pay $35.5 million a year to an elite player on a roster that is not competing for anything. And honestly, part of me wants this done right now before the season even kicks off. But the analytical side of me pumps the brakes, because I have already watched this front office overpay before trying to fix a problem fast, and it did not always work out. So I am sticking with caution here, even if the fan in me wants the opposite. And for the Bears, the logic is crystal clear. Chicago made the playoffs last season as the number 2 seed in the NFC. They are in full contention mode with Caleb Williams entering his 3rd year under Ben Johnson. A pass rusher at Crosby's level, someone who can generate pressure without needing a constant blitz, who frees up the cornerbacks to play more aggressive coverage, is exactly the kind of piece that separates a good team from a team that wins playoff series. The question is not whether they want him. The question is whether the price, the timing, and Crosby's health all line up in November. Fam, if this actually happens, it is going to be one of the biggest moves of the entire Poles era. But there are still too many pieces that need to fall into place first. And listen to how this connects to what you just heard, because both stories are about the exact same thing. How Ryan Poles manages assets that are not obvious starters on his roster. Dan Graziano from ESPN published a set of quarterback projections for 2027 on August 20th, and right there, among the names, Tyson Bagent showed up as a possible long-term successor for Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay. Graziano's framing was roughly this. After another down year, the Bucs and Mayfield agree to part ways, and Tampa Bay once again looks for a reasonably priced quarterback solution, maybe someone like Tyson Bagent or Tanner McKee. Let us put this in perspective because it sounds wild at first glance, but it actually makes sense once you slow down and look at it. Mayfield is playing under a 3-year, $100 million contract that expires at the start of the new league year in March of 2027. That deal does not come with an automatic extension. If Tampa Bay has another disappointing year, and honestly the Bucs have spent a while promising more than they deliver, the organization is going to face a hard decision. Pay a quarterback in his 30s again, or look for a cheaper option that lets them invest that money across the rest of the roster. That is where Bagent enters the conversation. His current deal with the Bears is 2 years for $10 million. With a cap hit of just $4.75 million in 2027. That is basically nothing compared to what a starting quarterback costs in this league. And Bagent, realistically, wants to play. He has been the number 2 backup in Chicago behind Caleb Williams for 3 seasons now. And every year that passes, the door to a starting job somewhere else gets a little smaller if he does not get out soon. Now, the question I keep asking myself as an analytical fan, why would the Bears even let him go? And here is the answer people sometimes do not want to hear, because they have zero competitive reason to give him away for free. Bagent is under contract through 2027. Chicago can sit back comfortably, let his market value climb if he has a strong performance in some regular season game, like that Week 18 closer the reports keep mentioning, and only then evaluate serious offers. And I will be real with you, this one hits a little personal as a fan. I watched Bagent debut as an undrafted free agent, throwing under constant pressure in his first season. And there is something about watching a guy earn a real spot, not a handed one, that makes me root for him harder than I do for most draft prospects with all the hype. Brad Biggs, from the Chicago Tribune, already put a number on the table back in March. He said it would take at least a second-round pick to get the Bears to sit down and negotiate seriously on BAGENT. And he pointed directly to the organization, signaling that if someone is calling about him, it is because they know how much Chicago loves him, which raises the price automatically. That reads correct to me, and it reflects something we have already seen from polls in other negotiations. He does not sell cheap out of outside pressure or artificial urgency. What I find most interesting about all of this, and this is an opinion of mine that might sound a little controversial, is what it says about the talent evaluation culture inside Halas Hall. BAGENT arrived as an undrafted free agent in 2023 and earned a permanent roster spot purely on production and the coaching staff's trust. The fact that an ESPN analyst with sources across the entire league's front offices is already projecting him as a starter somewhere else within a year and a half is strong validation that the quarterback development work in Chicago is working, even from the backup seat, not just the starting one. That said, let us be honest about the limits of this projection. It is one analyst's prediction, riding on Mayfield having a bad year, on Tampa Bay choosing not to extend him, and on BAGENT holding his current level without an injury that changes his market value. That is too many conditional variables to treat as a done deal. I take it for what it is, a signal that the market believes in BAGENT, not a guarantee this plays out exactly as written. And if you were asking my gut as a fan, I would rather have BAGENT stick around one more season as the best backup in the league, because in football, you never know when a starter goes down, and having a reliable guy behind Caleb Williams is worth more than any draft pick. But things about Skritom, and to close things out, a story that ties directly into this team's receiver depth and shows something beautiful about football. When someone has to step away, there's always another guy waiting for his shot. Luther Burden III is going to miss the rest of training camp with a groin injury. The good news, and let me say it fast so nobody panics, is that it is not a severe injury. He is expected to be ready for the regular season opener against the Carolina Panthers on Sunday, September 13th. Rome Odunze talked about it this week with an honesty I appreciated. He said they miss the energy Burden brings to the game, that way of playing like he is trying to choke somebody out on every single route, and that they are excited to get him back on the field. Carolina, for context, actually had a decent pass defense last season despite finishing with a losing record. So Burden missing these weeks of preparation is not ideal, because it means fewer live reps against real pressure before an opener that will not be a walk in the park. But, and here's the part that genuinely has me excited, Burden's absence is opening the door for somebody who is earning it rep after rep. Caden Davis. According to what got discussed on the CHGO Bears podcast this week, Davis is shaping up as the 6th receiver on the roster, and he has already passed Scotty Miller in that fight for a 53-man roster spot. There is still time left. There is another preseason game this Saturday in Cincinnati, and another joint practice next week in Nashville, so nothing is fully locked in. But the pattern is undeniable. Every single practice, without fail, somebody is logging a Caden Davis touchdown. It used to come from Tyson Bagent and Case Keenum. Lately, it is coming straight from Caleb Williams. And there is a detail Rome Odunze dropped in an interview that I thought was key. The coaching staff tracks who the fastest player is at every single practice, with real metrics, not just the eye test. And Caden Davis is most days the fastest player on the entire roster. That is not a small detail for a team that, under Ben Johnson, wants to add real speed at every level of the offense. Listen, I'm not going to blow this out of proportion, like Caden Davis is the next Luther Burden. He still has to prove it in regular season games, against defenses playing for real, not in the third quarter of a preseason friendly. But the combination of verified speed, consistent production every single practice, and a Burden injury handing him extra reps at exactly the right moment makes this a story worth watching closely over the next 2 weeks. And this, for me, is what I love most about August in the NFL, more than some regular season games if I am being real. Watching a 5th-round receiver nobody knew about in April go rep for rep against a veteran with a name. That is pure football, no marketing, no noise, just reps earned the hard way. Bear down, and here's hoping Burden comes back healthy and Caden Davis still earns his spot anyway. There's nothing wrong with having too much healthy competition at receiver. That is everything I have got for you today, fam. A weird day, if we are being real. On one hand, Ryan Poles keeps knocking on big doors in the pass rush market, and that persistence with Crosby tells me the front office knows exactly where the biggest hole on this roster sits. On the other hand, we have got Tyson Bagent, our quiet backup, showing up in another team's starting quarterback projections, which speaks well of what is being built inside Halas Hall, even at the number 2 spot on the depth chart. And we close with Luther Burden out for a few weeks, but with Caden Davis proving that nobody on this roster gets a spot handed to them, This franchise carries 91 years of history, and one of the things I love most about this era of Poles and Ben Johnson is that every decision, from a $100 million trade candidate down to a fifth-round receiver fighting for a roster spot, feels like it is guided by an actual plan. I could be wrong. This already happened to me before with other teams that promised a plan and ended up improvising, but for now, the evidence backs it up. Bear down, always. If this video added something for you, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you make the Crosby trade in November, even if it costs a first-round pick? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.